What up YouTube, BonzEye here, back with another video. Today's video is a long time coming. It's going to be what I like to call a hidden gem review, where I answer the question, should you check out the anime Overlord? So firstly, a few clarifications here. If you're new to my channel or haven't seen my previous hidden gem review and are wondering what that is, basically this is a series I started on my channel where I give a shout out to a movie, TV series, or in this case anime that I've seen that I think is really good but doesn't get the attention it deserves. That said, in today's video, the anime I'll be talking about isn't necessarily a hidden gem.
Now, Overlord, we all know that one's going up here for me. I mean, I feel like that's kind of obvious. Let's just get that one out of the way. Nani?
At least in the isekai anime genre, but it is my personal favorite anime and I wanted to make my own version of a shout out for this anime, so that's why I'm making this video. That said, usually most of my hidden gem reviews will be about a niche show that maybe doesn't necessarily appeal to everyone, but is still pretty good. So that's why, because the show's a niche, I like to start off my hidden gem reviews by talking about what I would consider to be the target audience of that show. Then I'll move on to talking about other things like the characters and settings and so on. Thus, in today's video about Overlord, I will start off by talking about the target audience, then I'll move on to talking about the characters and the setting, then finally I'll give my final verdict on the show by rating it out of 10. Okay, intro done, let's get into my hidden gem review and answer the question, should you check out the anime Overlord?
1, 2, 3, 4.
Okay, so tackling the target audience of this show will take a bit of time, so bear with me. I'm going to simplify it though by giving an initial description of the show and then relating each component of that description to a target audience. Now, mind you, this is a very loose description of the show, but Overlord does have a lot of different elements to it that may attract other audiences beyond this, but I didn't want us to give away too many spoilers, so that's why I'm starting out simple and broad. I'll provide a few more details when I get to the premise and the characters, so don't get immediately discouraged if you don't fit any of these target audiences. Anyway, so my simple initial description of Overlord is that Overlord is a dark comedic fantasy RPG isekai anime. So I said a bunch of words there, quite long, but there are really three components to this description: dark comedic, fantasy RPG, and isekai anime. We'll start with that last part, isekai anime, because isekai is the broad genre under anime which Overlord falls under. So, what's an isekai anime? I know, most of you weebs watching this already know, but for the random curious soul who happened to stumble across this video, here's what it is. An isekai anime is basically an anime where a protagonist, usually someone from a world much like our own or somewhat similar to ours, gets transported to a different world, usually a more magical or fantastical world, but sci-fi variants do exist. As such, most isekai animes can be considered escapist fantasies for people who are looking for a bit of stress relief by viewing life through another world, or just interested in seeing what a different world might look like. These animes tend to be a lot more relaxing as opposed to like the survival type anime where a protagonist is thrust into a harsh world and they struggle against reality. I mean, those technically can be considered isekai anime, but most of these isekais tend to be more of a casual viewing experience, and the main characters tend to have some sort of advantage given to them initially to make things much more easier for them to progress in these new worlds. That's just a common trope, but not necessarily all isekai animes will follow that. The main thing though is you have someone from a world like ours being transported into a different one. I guess the most common Western example of what would be considered an isekai anime, if it ever got an anime adaptation, would be the story Alice in Wonderland. If you're looking for actual anime isekais though, you can look no further than Mushoku Tensei or Sword Art Online. Okay, so that's the big description out of the way. What about the other two? Well, dark comedic is pretty self-explanatory when you think about it, right? In Overlord, you have a lot of comedic gags, which adds quite a bit of light and levity to the show.
Which you all know, or I should hope you know if you're not a fool. Huh?
But when you get into some of these gags, not all of them, but some of them, you'll see that whilst they're funny on the surface level, when you get down to it, they're actually implying some pretty evil and horrifying shit. Think of the multitude of dark comedies that we've seen throughout the years, where you have evil characters doing evil things, or at least implying they're doing evil things off screen, and then you kind of get the picture here. I mean, think of the title of this show, Overlord. Then look at this guy. He's our main character. Does he strike you as the kind of guy who likes ice cream and long walks on sandy beach? That said, part of what makes dark comedies particularly great is that it allows for a level of nuance and depth to the story that you typically won't get in your typical stories that follow the hero's journey. Stories about clear-cut good guys versus clear-cut bad guys are great for a lot of things, especially the moments where the good guy triumphs over the bad guy and you get that sense of levity about good winning over evil. The issue though is that a lot of the gray areas in these stories tend to get overlooked by the writers, but that's kind of necessitated though by the nature of these stories. The problem though is that when people try to analyze these heroic stories in a more critical way, they tend to hit a wall and find the stories to be a little shallow and lackluster on closer inspection. That said, if you go the complete opposite way though and make a very dark story, which much more realistically depicts how events can be they fictional or historic, whilst it can be heralded as a very artistic film by critics and audiences who do that type of critical analysis, a lot of the rest of the normie audiences who just kind of want to relax when they watch a movie or a show can wind up getting isolated by this type of storytelling, and so they stop watching the show or downright refuse to start watching it in the first place. Thus, this is where dark comedies come in. These type of stories will also still allow the writer to engage in some more nuanced storytelling with some more deep themes that can be analyzed. But they also allow the writer to sprinkle in some jokes and gags to make the show light and allow the more casual audiences to also engage with the story. Obviously though, it doesn't go as far as the very dark shows do, but it does allow some of those deeper themes. And obviously it can't be as completely slapstick comedic as the very funny, but like I said, it allows for a certain depth of story that those stories can provide. And so as you can see, it's kind of like the middle ground between the two. And of course, it's important to note here that the range between comedy and dark can range widely for stories that fall under the dark comedies category. Spoiler alert, whilst Overlord does start off as being particularly comedic, it does get pretty dark as the show goes on. So now we finally come to that middle part, fantasy RPG. So again, for the random normie who happened to stumble upon my video, RPG, at least in nerd speak, stands for role-play game. This can be video games, tabletop games like Dungeons and Dragons, or card games like Mafia. Is Mafia a card game? Actually don't know. Once again, if you think about the phrase, it's pretty self-explanatory, right? Role-play game. So basically in these games, whether they're on a computer or on a table, you pick a role or a play style, and then depending on the nature of the game, your effectiveness at fulfilling that role will make you more successful as you play the game. In this context though, the RPG we're talking about is a fantasy virtual video game called Yggdrasil, set in the year 2136. Now, when I say virtual video game, I'm not talking about the video games that we play now on the computers and stuff. I'm talking about the futuristic type. Remember, I said the year here is 2136, so at this point they have those virtual headsets that you can put on your head and fully integrate with the machine. Not the kind we have right now, which doesn't actually connect to your brain, it just shows you a screen and you're looking around in it, but the kind that you actually fall asleep and your whole body goes into the virtual world. Think of the movie Matrix, where the guy literally gets plugged into a computer and the person directly interfaces with the machine and goes into that virtual world. Another actual isekai anime example would be Sword Art Online, which I mentioned earlier. Now, minor spoiler here, even though I just mentioned, virtual video games and going into games, and this anime does start in a virtual video game. The thing is, I watch a lot of reactors on YouTube react to this anime, and I've noticed that a good number of them tend to make the same mistaken assumption when they're watching this anime. They assume that because the main character started off in a video game, that he's trapped in a video game. But that's actually not what happens. You see, the rest of this story actually does not, and I repeat, not take place in a video game. Instead, takes place in an actual real world with real people and real histories and so on. I'll explain this misconception a bit further when I get to explaining the premise of this show. As for the target audience though, this part of my description really actually targets two different groups of people. On the one end, you'll have people who like magical and fantastical stories that involve Dungeons and Dragons and elves and dwarves and so on, because, you know, it's set in a magical setting. So if you like stories that are set in a fantasy world, this is one of them. The other group of people that may also be interested in this anime are people who like role-playing video games, or just any type of role-playing game really, because it features a lot of the elements of role-play games inside of it. Kind of straightforward really. So to summarize, if you like stories which feature escapism, dark humor with a bit of depth, and fantasy with role-play game elements thrown into it, this may be a show for you to check out. That said, I would once again like to warn you guys that this is not your typical heroic journey, so prepare for that dark humor to get pretty dark. Okay, the premise. So let's start off with that misconception I was talking about earlier. You see, Overlord's main character, Momonga, as he was known back in the game by his friends, or Ainz as he comes to be known throughout this anime, was originally a normal middle-class salaryman working in 2138's Japan. That said, two fundamentally different things happened to him during the first episode of this anime. Firstly, Momonga, the human, or at least his consciousness, gets merged with his in-game character from Yijutsu. Now his character was a level 100, max level, undead elder lich, which is a type of skeleton, but a very powerful type of skeleton. The second thing that happens to him is Momonga, now in his level 100 elder lich body, gets transported alongside his entire guild base and all the NPCs inside it to a brand new 100% real alternate world. It's not a video game world, it's a real actual world with actual people, histories, magic, elves, dwarves, dragons, and all the like. Now I guess I should cover what a guild base is and what NPCs are, eh? So once again, for the normies who happen to have stumbled upon this video, remember when I said that this is an RPG, a role-playing game? Well, because you're forced to select a role in these RPG games, typically you need to work together with other people who have skills you don't to cover for your weaknesses. And so that's why in RPGs it's common to form teams, or as they call them, guilds. So basically, Momonga's guild base is the in-game base for him and his friends. As for NPCs, once again, it's a pretty self-explanatory phrase. It stands for non-player characters. So basically, these are characters in a video game that are part of the world and are not controlled by a human person. Hence, non-player characters. Now, the NPCs that were in Momonga's guild base were actually NPCs that were designed by him and his friends for the guild base. And they become the main supporting cast of this show, and these guys are quite the highlight for the show as well. See, unlike Momonga, who was originally human, all of his NPCs were robotic drone servants, which helped maintain and protect the guild base. They all had unique abilities and looks and backstories, which were given to them by Momonga and the rest of his guild. But practically speaking, when it really came down to it, they were just robotic servants who listened to a few commands and did what they were told, with no free thought, let alone free will of their own. However, in the beginning of this anime, when they get transported along with Momonga to the New World, they also undergo a transformation, but one that's quite different from him. You see, unlike Momonga, they didn't have a human consciousness attached to them, but what they did have was the flavor text which described them, and in some cases their personalities in quite a bit of detail. As such, when they came to life, you now have some pretty unique characters with some larger than life personalities. And most of the gags I was talking about earlier come from some of the misunderstandings between these NPCs and their overlord. Now, I won't say too much beyond this point because that will cover the actual plot of this show. What I will ask you to do is, once again, take a look at these characters. They say don't judge a book by its cover, but in this case, you probably should. Well, most of the time. Alright, so I'm gonna stop right there now and move on to the last part of this video, my final verdict. Okay, so final verdict time. All in all, I give the show a 8 out of 10. Okay, I know. This is my personal favorite anime, so yes, I am a bit biased towards it. The true objective value is probably somewhere around a 7 out of 10. That said, to be honest, I almost wanted to give it a 9 out of 10, but there are some glaringly obvious flaws to it that made me drop it down to that 8. So some of the ones I can mention without spoiling it are the fact that there is some horrible CGI in a lot of the beginning seasons, the first 3. And also, when I started delving more into the lore of this anime by watching a lot of YouTubers who cover stuff from the light novel that this anime is originally based on, I realized that they had cut out a lot of content from this anime. And that's what made me deeply disappointed, and hence I dropped it down from that 9 to 8. Like, to be honest, there are some anime which I would rate higher than Overlord. Even though Overlord is my favorite, I'd rate those other ones higher. I'd give them like a 9. That said, I still believe this is a great anime that genuinely doesn't get the attention it deserves. One of the other honorable mentions that I forgot to mention that bumps it up to that 8 out of 10 is the music of the show. Now, I'll admit I'm not much of a music guy myself, but what I can say is that the music of the show is thematic as They're obviously not the type of songs you can jam to on a casual day, but generally speaking, the themes of the show fit in really well with the content of it. Oh, and shout out to OXT and Myth and Royd. These two groups have been making the openings and endings for Overlord since it started, and they have been doing phenomenal work. These are easily some of the best anime intros and endings that I've ever heard, which, for those of you who didn't know, were songs written specifically for this anime. And if you listen to a lot of the lyrics, you realize that, yeah, these songs were written for this anime. Check them out. And in case the opinion of a confessed non-musical guy doesn't sway you, you can check out the multitude of covers that have been done for Overlord's openings and endings on YouTube, many of which have been translated into different languages. Anyway guys, that's my non-spoiler review of Overlord. I hope you all enjoyed it, and if you feel like you're the target audience, go ahead and check out the show when you can. If you like the video, whether you're the target audience or not, please give the video a thumbs up, and if you're looking forward to more content from me, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. You'll find that I talk about a lot of topics on my channel, ranging from movies to TV series to games to anime. I may also talk about some random interesting technology that I come across, because that's one thing I find interesting. And I may also talk about some topics that are more specific to my region of the world, the South Pacific. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, you can go ahead and subscribe to my channel. You can expect those videos to come out every weekend, as well as a regular Let's Play that I'll usually release during the week. So yeah, at least you can expect 2 videos from me every week. Anyway, this is where I'm going to end this video. Thank you very much for watching. This is BonzEye, signing out. Catch you all later.